So the equity theory of change means that we ground ourselves in recognizing like our colonial history. We make sure that we have really good relationships with everybody in our communities, because each district in BC is very distinct. Like here in Vancouver, if I was working the Vancouver School District, it is very different than working in Burns Lake.
That's the voice of Dr. Shannon Behan, who is back as a guest on our podcast this week. Dr. Behan is the president of the British Columbia Principal Vice Principal Association, also known as the BCPVPA. Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. Principals are the ones in the middle, balancing the demands of senior administrators and the needs of students and communities. But are they getting the support they need?
This podcast is brought to you by the words contextual literacy, which involves the ability to understand and navigate the social, cultural, and political contexts within a specific environment like a school. Principals must be literate in the dynamics and needs of their unique school communities. It is the ability to recognize, respect, and respond to the diverse cultural backgrounds within a community. This allows principals to tailor their approaches to better align with the values and needs of the local population. Sounds like a restorative approach to me.
Check out our website, www.restorative.ca, for some simple ways to build that contextual literacy. Now, let's join your hosts, Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. What do you think about principals leading from the middle, being the ones who actually implement and make the kinds of changes that are needed for schools today?
I think that is what is happening. And I don't think, when you look at the systemic structure of most districts, the impact that the superintendent and the board have is on the directors or their associate superintendents, those pieces. And it's a tough role kind of being at the principal, because you're the meat in the middle of that sandwich, but that's where the work is. And I think when you look at most really successful districts, they realize the role of the principals and vice principals is so important. And they have really good relationships, lots of support, lots of professional development. If there are issues, they ask, what's the problem we need to solve? And because they recognize the value of that particular role within the whole system.
It's interesting you say that, because my experience is the exact opposite. That principals are the ones who get dumped on. Like, I can remember distinctly going to a principals meeting where administrative leader after the other got up and talked about all the things that needed to happen, the changes that needed to happen, what you weren't doing, and that kind of thing. And it was so bad that when they had the regional principals meeting, the superintendent or the person in charge of that area said, we can't actually have our regular agenda. We just need to talk about what everybody experienced with that, because easily 1/3 of the people said, I'm done then. If this is all the stuff that keeps coming at me, then I'm out of here. And so what kinds of things can principals expect in terms of support? I think it's great to say that, but what was happening was exactly the opposite in terms of supporting them.
Yeah, and I guess for me, that goes back to what is the understanding. I guess all different districts are somewhat different, but what is the understanding of the senior leadership team on the value of the role of the principal, and how is that brought to life? But I guess I don't know the context of the story of the history, Stan, but I guess for me, I would approach it at the second meeting and say, okay, look, we got to back it up here. We got to figure out how we're going to operate together. What are our values? How do we communicate? Because I would rely on the fact that you're in the school, see what is happening day to day. You understand the struggle and the families that are coming in, the children and the needs that they have, or the challenges or the successes. So you are the one that is gonna put all that information together and communicate, and that will drive what we need to make happen. systemically. So I go back to, and I don't have the research right here, but there is a lot of research that kind of supports the fact, the importance and the value that has to be placed in the hands of the principals in the system. I could go back and I'd like to meet your group.
The cool thing was that the person who was in charge of that had exactly your response to the situation and spent 2.5 hours
Yeah.
working with that group to talk through, okay, what actually happened? What can we do as a group? How should we be responding? What kinds of things can we do? And she was very good at, and it was a restorative circle basically that she did around allowing people the opportunity, first of all, to speak, but then also to hear from others to say, oh, I wasn't the only one that heard this. And what are some ways that we can build each other up as opposed to just being put down by the previous meeting? So it was a very hopeful meeting.
Good. Yeah, very good. As it should be. And that's the other piece to remember is sometimes it can get fear-based when
Yes.
principals are articulating whatever the challenges and issues are. But one thing we have to remember is, and Stephen, both you and I have recently come out of schools, and the thing to remember is principals and vice principals love what they do. We love being around kids and love forming relationships with families and building community and creating partnerships and understanding what's happening for the pack. And we love that work. And I think possibly when there becomes a disrepair in the system is that people feel worried in some way, like it becomes fear-based, which doesn't lend itself to good kind of problem solving and approach to things.
What I've seen the disconnect is the principals that truly do understand their community and the needs and the parents' needs and the kids' needs and the community need. And they're working really hard at that. But then and that's great. You're doing good work, relationship based, but how are those reading scores? And so it still has to be answered to for that when it could take years of that kind of relationship work to be able to bring a community along and for those things to be showing so that they feel that pressure that's great, but how's this happening? So now that's dismissed and they feel under the pressure to produce these scores, which is not where their heart is. And they know that it's not exactly right in the moment for this community.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I look back at when I first became a principal and in all the intervening years, if I was to write another book about the role of the principal, I would call it The Disappearing Autonomy of the Principalship. Over the years, as a principal, there was less and less decision-making power it was taken from us. Decisions were made up high, and we became more of that middle management role. Here's what you need to do, now do it. And we were managers as opposed to leaders. And you can debate what's the difference between a manager and a leader, but I certainly felt that towards the end of my career before I retired. I was just managing other people's expectations and other people's plans and policies and procedures and all that. It wasn't mine. And yet when I first began as the leader of a school, I was the leader of that school. I had autonomy to make site-based decisions that I felt were best for my community. And when I started off as a principal, I was in a very high, low socioeconomic, high needs community that had very low scores. And to Shelley's point, that wasn't my highest priority, getting the test scores up. It was decreasing suspensions and getting kids back in class and calming the situation down, because it was like a track meet with kids running up down the halls all day. And so to me, that was the higher priority. And I was given the autonomy to do that by my superintendent. He said, what's your plan? Okay, that's a good plan, do it. Yeah, I would say the disappearing autonomy might be the biggest thing.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of ideas, like when in the Principal 2.0, when Michael Fulham was just talking, and I wish I had the actual quote, but he made a commentary about instructional leadership of principals and vice principals, like maybe put that to the side a little bit. And so I'm not in agreement with that for sure, because again, that's where you have the opportunity to have a lot of impact. There is no way that we can improve outcomes for students without relationships. And that is a starting point, but that's also the foundation for everything that we do in our schools. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the equity theory of change that we're bringing along here in BC. The way that it started, basically, it's looking at what we do and how we do it. And the equity theory of change is what is driving our professional learning plans. And I'll just explain a little bit about how it came to be. Not too long ago at a meeting, one of our colleagues had said, are we an anti-racist organization? And so we brought it back here and we thought a lot about it and had conversations. And then we thought, yes, but how do we know that? How do we communicate that? What does it look like in practice? So what we worked at was creating our equity theory of change. And that is the foundation piece for everything that we do in the association and we do to support principals and vice principals. And I'll give you an example. If you look at the OECD results, Finland is struggling a little bit. They're always top 5 or whatever, but they're coming down. BC, we're holding a good pattern. And what has happened is in Finland, there is an influx of immigrants from all over. And historically in Finland, it has been quite a homogenous country. Teachers were educated in a certain way, but now with the influx of a lot of people from different places all over the world, different languages, different customs, cultures, sometimes people aren't prepared to know how to work in that kind of new world. And in BC, luckily, because we have a high immigrant population, that's a foundation that's internalized in all of us here in the work that we do. So the equity theory of change means that we ground ourselves in recognizing like our colonial history. We make sure that we have really good relationships with everybody in our communities, because each district in BC is very distinct. Like here in Vancouver, if I was working the Vancouver School District, it is very different than working in Burns Lake. So this high multicultural immigrant population, and Burns Lake probably, I don't have the information offhand, but has probably a high Indigenous population and then, so very different. So a piece of it is that you make sure you know your community, the context in which you're working and living. Stephen, that kind of speaks a little bit to the importance of the role of the principal. Is if I'm going to do some work with literacy, I need to know the values of the people that are coming into my school. That will help drive the programs that we have on offer. And then the other piece for administrators, of course, is a collaborative approach to the work that we do. I know in my previous school that I was at, specifically with our literacy team, we had a collaborative approach to how we're delivering our literacy program. And it took me a bit to think, because it shifted my thinking, because I thought I'm the instructional leader. I've been studying about reading. I have my ideas about the approaches, but I had to give over to somebody who could specialize more deeply, because I did have a lot of other things to do. And so I'm curious, Stephen, your thoughts on how do you navigate that piece where you actually have to give over? And it was right, actually, in my experience, it was right. So what do you, just curious.
I would go back to the word relationships. If you are in a situation, like to your point, everything's different. Even schools within the same district might have a whole different demographic and a different look to them. That it's having that ability to first see all that, but then be able to figure out a plan that is different, and then have the permission then to do that. And so the relationship you have as a principal with your superintendent or those above you to say, here's the way we want to approach it here, because this is what fits my school community. And then being given that permission to make those veers off of what everybody else may be doing. And I think that's the part that a positive relationship with your senior staff has to have. The other thing is, and I'm not sure what they do in BC, we went through this revolving door piece of principles. Most of us were never in our schools longer than 3 years. And then we kept saying, this isn't working for us. This isn't helping us. We can't impact change. We can't develop relationships in less than 3 years. We need to be in our schools longer. And so it was intentionally 5 to 7 years. And now that's different. We all know systemic change takes 3 to 5 years. To holistically change something is 3 to 5 years, according to all the experts. To me, it was always build the relationships and build those bridges first, so that then you can start to make those changes.
For me, when you're talking about giving over some of the work or sharing in that, it's also a mindset piece connected to that these are professionals as well. So it really is a mindset that these are educated people. They do have something to add, that I am not the only one that can carry information and have something of value to share. And once people feel comfortable in that you're open to receiving that, you're going to get a lot of expertise come through and have that collaborative approach. That it isn't just, I have to sit and listen and maybe I'll carry it out, or maybe I'll go back and do exactly what I want to do anyway.
What I was just going to add is that this is Fullen's second key area of impact, called contextual literacy, right? He says you have to just be very intentional and understand what is the community dynamic that is within your leadership team, within the school, within the students, within the parent community, within your staff community, within your board, within your board leadership, and that you have to be very intentional about understanding what that context is in order to be able to work at the broader goals. You're going to go about it quite differently in Burns Lake and in Vancouver, right? But that's the role of the principal, to just be aware of those differences within the community.
Stan, just with the contextual literacy, that's the magic, like what goes on in schools. And I use the term magic and it might seem trite or something, but that's the magic of what happens in classrooms. It's an art. Teaching is an art. You can give somebody kind of the standard operating procedures of how to run a classroom, take attendance and have breaks and do your anticipatory set. And but the nuances where teachers can read what's happening just by watching what's going on for a student. And then within 20 seconds, they can act or react or shift. That's an art. And then what happens with principals is also an art, and it's magic. So if you're in Burns Lake, you have to understand the context of your community. Not too long ago, Dr. Dustin Louis out of UBC and Leona Prince, she works for the ministry. They were actually in Burns Lake, and it has a high Indigenous population who were not performing as well as their kind of local counterparts. So they did some research, they put some programming in place there. And over a couple of years, what they noticed is that the reading outcomes and the grad outcomes for Indigenous students were almost on par with kind of the rest of the local students. But they were able to read the context of the community, put some programming in place along with the whole leadership team and the teachers that met the needs of the kids in the community. If they were to use that same structure in Nanaimo or Port Coquitlam, I'm guessing that the outcomes wouldn't be the same. But the principals and the team, like that's part of the art, is going into a community and then being able to read who are your people, what are the values of your community.
As you could hear in our conversation, it's essential that principals develop an understanding of the unique needs of each school's community, whether that's urban or rural, multicultural or homogenous, and adapting leadership approaches to fit these contexts. Principals who do develop collaborative support and professional development are the most likely to listen to and respond to the school community. Find out more about our work with restorative circles that support showing up, listening, and responding to community through restorative practices at www.restorative.ca. Yes, the role of principal is complex, and it's doable with collaboration and restorative conversations.